So my name is Dagmar Kminiak and I'm the Manager of Inclusion and Disability Services here at the university. So before we begin with the panel event, I would like to do an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. So I'm currently on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So I further acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which you are on and pay respects to their elders, past, present and future. So I would like to welcome once again everyone to our first event of Disability Inclusion Week, which this year also coincides with the International Week of Deaf People. So Disability Inclusion Week really aims to bring us together as a university community to build inclusive environments, continue to increase disability awareness, as well as to create a culture in which everyone, including students and staff with disability, can thrive and realise their full potential. And this year's theme for Disability Inclusion Week is promoting awareness and understanding of invisible disabilities. So we know that 4.4 million Australians have a disability, but not many of us are actually aware that about 90% of those disabilities are actually invisible. So what that means is that students with invisible disabilities are likely to actually be in every single one of your classrooms that you are either attending as a student or as a teacher. And many of the people with whom you're actually interacting with on a daily basis are actually likely to be experiencing an invisible disability at some point in their lives. And it is important that we are aware of this. So in today's event, what we'll do is we'll be unpacking the myths regarding invisible disabilities. We'll learn about how invisible disability can impact on student life, as well as learn about the support which inclusion and disability services can provide students at the university who are experiencing direct impacts on their study as a result of their disability. And so on that note, I would like to very warmly welcome and introduce our three panel members today who will be reflecting on their experiences as students who are studying and living with an invisible disability. So firstly, I would like to welcome Stephanie Mantilla, who is a third-year PhD student at the University of Sydney, who is passionate about raising awareness about invisible disabilities. So Stephanie's research focus is on understanding the experiences of people with invisible disability and examining the representation of people with invisible disabilities in the media. So Stephanie is also the 2021 recipient of the Christopher Neville Prize for her research that examines disability and the media. So welcome, Stephanie. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Edward Cairns, who is a first-year student in the Sydney Medical Program, who has been living with an invisible disability since the age of 11. So Edward will be kindly sharing some of his positive as well as negative experiences of living life with an invisible disability. And we'll talk about how we can all contribute to creating inclusive and supportive environments. And I would also like to welcome Katie Barton, who is a first-year Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Advanced Studies student who is studying through the Taronga Wildlife Conservatorium stream. So this year, Katie trained as a mental health speaker for BATI, which is a youth preventative mental health organisation. And Katie is passionate about sharing her experience of mental health with New South Wales school students in an attempt to break the stigma around mental health. And today we'll also hear from Stephanie Palomo, who is a Senior Inclusion and Disability Services Officer within the Inclusion and Disability Services team, who will talk about the support available here at Sydney for students with disabilities. So just some housekeeping before we get going with our panel. So live remote captions are available. In order to turn that on, you can see the bottom button, which is a CC button. Questions at the end of the panel will be via Slido. So in order to set that up, please go to slido.com and use the hashtag DIW for Disability Inclusion Week 2021. And we'll also, yes, so that's now on the PowerPoint slide, as you can see. So please use that. It'll be about 10 minutes at the end of the panel for questions. And just a reminder, please stay on mute during the event. And we are also recording this event, and we'll make the recording available following the event for anyone who was not able to make it. So thank you, everyone. Welcome. And I will now hand over to our first speaker, Stephanie Mantilla. Thank you, Stephanie. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dagmar, for acknowledging country. I'm also on the land of the Gadigal people today, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So, hi, my name is Stephanie Mantilla. I'm a PhD student in health sciences. My PhD, as Dagmar noted, looks at how to be more inclusive of people with invisible disability in Instagram health advice. Before I begin, I'd just like to give you a brief background about myself. So I've been interested in invisible disabilities since my undergrad degree in media and communications, an interest that has largely stemmed from my mum having multiple invisible disabilities and my watching of her experiences navigating her invisible disabilities. I'm passionate about raising awareness and learning about invisible disabilities, and I'm also a student with the Centre for Disability Research and Policy and Centre for Research Excellence in Disability and Health, both of which do some important research to help improve the lives of people with disability. So, as Dagmar also noted, invisible disabilities are estimated to make up approximately 90% of all disabilities. So they're surprisingly common, yet they're usually not what comes to mind when somebody says that they have a disability. As disability studies theorist Tanya Tuchkowski observes, when we imagine disability, we often imagine a person in a wheelchair. More broadly, we have a tendency to imagine disability as a visible sort of identity, something that we can see and find visual proof of. This tendency ranges from a variety of things, perhaps most notably, though, medicine's problematic history of attempting to visualize bodily symptoms in order to find objective proof of them, and wanting to also visualize disabilities. The field has had an extensive history of investing in and relying on technologies that visually show what have been thought to be considered abnormalities in the standards for ideal health. Nonetheless, our culture, the media, and society have generally also reinforced the idea that disabilities tend to be visible. So in some ways, invisible disabilities are actually invisible from the way that we tend to imagine disability. There are, however, some exceptions to the rule. So for example, many people, deafness is often considered an invisible disability, and that's much more strongly associated with the idea of disability than many other invisible disabilities. And the reason that I bring up the exception to the rule is because I'd like you to keep that in mind during today's presentation. There is so much diversity when it comes to invisible disabilities and the variety of them that there are, and even in the range of experiences of a singular invisible disability, there's a lot of variety. So what I talk about today touches on some of the recurring themes that I found that people with invisible disability experience during my research. But I obviously can't speak to every single experience of invisible disability, and I wouldn't want to try to. And that's why it's really great that we also have Katie and Ed on the panel today sharing their experiences of invisible disability. So, what is an invisible disability? Well, an invisible disability is any long-term impairment, health condition, and/or illness that you usually can't see in most everyday circumstances. So think, for example, lupus, fibromyalgia, and even depression. Now, as you may have noticed, I've defined invisible disability as something that you usually can't see in most everyday circumstances. And the reason for that is because a person's invisible disability isn't necessarily always invisible. In fact, that's a common misconception and the first myth that I'll be talking about today. So some invisible disabilities can actually become visible at certain times. So to give you an example, a person with epilepsy may experience a seizure and all of a sudden they may find that their invisible disability has become temporarily visible. Or a person with lupus may one day wake up with a butterfly rash on their face, which is just a light red rash. And again, their invisible disability has become temporarily visible. And for other people with invisible disabilities, they may find that technically their invisible disabilities are always visible. It's just that we don't recognize them as disabilities. So for instance, a person with rheumatoid arthritis may have a permanent rheumatoid nodule on one of their fingers that prevents them from completely straightening it out. However, because many of us don't recognize that to be a symptom of rheumatoid arthritis and it's relatively small, it doesn't quite register as a visible disability and would still be considered an instance of invisible disability. So what these examples show us is that invisibility is a rather subjective idea, and that the term invisible disability itself is actually a lot more flexible, inclusive, and complex than many of us at first realize. So the next misconception that I'll be talking about today is that people with invisible disabilities are actively hiding their disabilities. In short, this simply just isn't true, even if a person with invisible disability chooses not to disclose their disability. And I'd like to clarify that I'm not suggesting that there's anything wrong with wanting to hide an aspect of yourself. However, for many people with invisible disabilities, the way they look allows them to pass by default, which simply means that they almost always don't look like they have a disability. So it actually takes more work for them to reveal that they do have a disability than otherwise. So they're not really hiding anything. And that's also why the term hidden disabilities, which is sometimes used interchangeably with invisible disabilities, can be a little bit misleading in its connotations. So another myth about invisible disabilities that I'd like to talk about is that invisible disabilities are less legitimate than visible disabilities. And this is a really prevalent myth that overlaps with a number of other myths, such as they're less painful, they're less valid, and they're less real than visible disabilities. And the myth draws from that really problematic history that I was talking about at the beginning of the presentation, and the resulting cultural associations that disabilities tend to be visible. And the myth is completely wrong. There is absolutely no association between a disability's visibility and how painful, severe, or legitimate a disability is. The impact of an invisible disability on a person's life is very real and shouldn't be trivialized in the way this myth suggests. And the myth can actually be really damaging for people with invisible disability, with research showing that it can create stigma and damage a person's self-esteem. It can also encourage people with invisible disability to feel like they have to pass, as opposed to disclose their invisible disabilities in order to ask for accommodations, because they're concerned that their requests may not be taken seriously. Unfortunately, during my research, I've found that a number of students with invisible disabilities have felt quite impacted by this myth on campus, to the point where they've told me that they'd rather put up with some pain or discomfort as opposed to asking for help and disclosing their invisible disabilities because of the way they've previously been treated when they've disclosed their invisible disabilities, whereby they've been treated like they're faking their disability or exaggerating the pain or just painted in a negative light. It's far too common for students with invisible disabilities to be seen as lazy, flaky, or just using it as an excuse to get out of a social commitment or to do work. And the disbelief, I'd say, is especially common for students with invisible disabilities that cause chronic pain, fatigue, or just ill health. And I'd like to highlight that just because we can't visibly see somebody's pain, fatigue, or ill health doesn't mean that managing those experiences can't have a very large and real effect on a student's life and their studies as well. So to give you an example, some students with chronic illnesses may consider themselves spoonies. And the reason for this is because Each day, they figuratively allocate themselves a number of spoons, which is representative of how much energy they think they're going to have throughout the day. And the idea is that they'll then allocate the spoons to the tasks that they have to do throughout the day in order of most essential to least essential. And if they go over the set amount of spoons that they have, they know that it'll likely affect their health negatively, either the next couple of days or potentially even months, depending on how severe it is. And at the end of the day, not everything can be essential on a student's to-do list. So sometimes that means that preparing for a tutorial or finishing an assignment may just fall short of that list. And if you're thinking, well, why don't they just plan ahead then? Well, even planning ahead isn't always possible, with many people who experience chronic fatigue, pain, or ill health finding that those experiences come and go rather unexpectedly. So just like that, they may find that an afternoon that they had carefully reserved to write an essay that's worth half their grade may just end up kind of disappearing, in the sense that their body doesn't quite feel up to the task. And if they were to try and work through the pain, it would just cause longer term health implications than otherwise. Invisible disabilities can also affect smaller day-to-day interactions that some of us wouldn't even think twice about. So, for example, for students who experience chronic fatigue and pain, it's sometimes common for them to find that standing for too long can be a rather exhausting task and difficult. So if you're standing with a group of friends, whether it be in a classroom setting or in a social setting, and one of your friends asks you to sit down, try and be as accommodating as possible and find a place where you can all sit down as a group, as opposed to suggesting that they should just go off and sit down on their own, because it can be kind of socially isolating as well. And you never know how much pain a person can potentially be in. So the reason that I wanted to share these examples is because I think that they remind us that it's not always a student's fault if they turn up to a tutorial underprepared, or are a little bit late in finishing an assignment, or just falling behind in finishing their section of a group project. And I understand, as both a tutor and student myself, that at times it can be a little bit tricky or potentially inconvenient for others in the class. But part of being inclusive towards students with invisible disabilities is that from both a student and teacher perspective, I think we have to remember that we need to start from a place of kindness, empathy, and understanding towards each other, irrespective of whether somebody's told us that they have an invisible disability or not. And part of this means adopting a flexible and empathetic approach to all our everyday interactions with everyone. So this flexible and empathetic approach that I'm encouraging can be employed in a variety of ways at university, such as giving an extension whenever possible if you're a tutor, helping out a group member finish their section of a group project if they're falling behind and you have a bit of extra time, or even just being extra understanding of the friend who always cancels social plans at the last minute because they're not feeling well. In short, what I'm suggesting is that if somebody asks for help, believe them and try and be as accommodating as possible of them. Adopting this flexible and empathetic approach is crucial to fostering a university environment where students with invisible disability don't feel like disclosing their invisible disability will lead to stigma or won't be taken seriously. Because, like I've noted before, research shows that it can sometimes have a negative effect on their health overall and in the long run. And I also wanted to clarify that if you're a student with invisible disability who doesn't want to disclose your invisible disability, I'm not advocating that you should have to. That's a completely personal decision. What I'm advocating is that we should all be striving to create an environment, especially on campus, where people with invisible disability can feel like they can disclose their invisible disability if they want to and receive the necessary accommodations without the risk of getting stigmatized or being brushed off or just being thought of as lazy by their peers. Finally, if a friend does confide in you about their invisible disability, I'd really like to suggest that you actively listen to their experiences and the ways they suggest that you can support them, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who know their invisible disability the best. And for any students with invisible or visible disabilities, I'd like to remind you that there are inclusion and disability services that you have access to, and that I know that Stephanie will be talking about later on in the panel as well. So please feel free to reach out. And remember that you have a right to access accommodations that would help support your studies and hopefully make navigating university life just a little bit easier. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that fantastic overview of what invisible disabilities are, and some of the myths that you touched upon are very, very important to demystify, particularly the myth that the impact of an invisible disability has less of an impact on a person than that of a visible disability, and that's certainly something that is not often the case. And I really like the way you ended your presentation by reminding everyone to, adopt a flexible and empathetic approach when interacting with everyone, because really the base of that is that anyone could be experiencing an invisible disability at any given time. So I think that's fantastic. So thank you for that. So now we are going to hear from Edward, who is a first-year student in the Sydney Medical Program. So over to you, Edward.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ed. I'm a first-year student in the Sydney Medical Program, as you've just heard. And I've been living with an invisible disability since the age of 11. In 2005, I was diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease, or IBD, specifically ulcerative colitis, which is similar to Crohn's disease, and it affects my gut. Then in 2011, I was diagnosed with IgA nephropathy, which affects my kidneys, and earlier this year with ankylosing spondylitis, which affects my spine and joints. For anyone not familiar with these conditions, they're all autoimmune diseases that result from my immune system not recognizing my own cells and therefore attacking my body. I take a lot of medications and often experience flare-ups of my conditions in which they kind of break free from the control of the medications and start actively affecting me again. The nature of these conditions is that symptoms vary from day to day, and the impacts that they have on my life can range from insignificant to debilitating. And naturally, the type and amount of support that I need also varies. On a day-to-day basis, I experience chronic pain, various side effects from medications, and symptoms associated with the inflammation and breakdown of my gut, kidneys, and joints. My conditions are not physically visible, so I frequently encounter misconceptions about having an invisible disability. People often don't understand that the impacts people often don't understand what the impacts are, and many think that symptoms are constant and therefore predictable and manageable. Others think that getting treatment means being cured, and others fail to understand that the manifestations of my conditions aren't the same as their best friends, aunties, neighbors, niece with the same condition. I think one of the most important things to recognize is that people's disabilities are unique, and the impact that my disability has had on my life is different to other people I know with the same conditions. For me, the effects of my chronic illness have varied throughout my life. They're not constant, and the changes are both physically and mentally impactful. The mental and emotional burden of living with an invisible disability is a lot and is something that is often forgotten. Not knowing when your condition may worsen and trying to manage life with that uncertainty is anxiety-inducing. I can't control how my disability affects me, so things that are easy for other people can be more challenging for me. For example, when I'm searching for jobs, I'll often encounter the question, is there anything that will impact your ability to perform the job? And while this is a quick no for most people, my honest answer is that I don't know. I can't guarantee that I won't have a flare up and that my abilities will be altered. For me, this has meant that living with an invisible disability has been a battle of trying to pass as able-bodied to avoid discrimination versus wanting to share my condition in order to get support. And I've struggled with this balance for a long time. In high school, I used to hide my disability because there were times when I had shared information with friends who were not at all supportive. And when I finally felt comfortable to notify the school, the support I received from staff really didn't help. I had a year advisor who was in charge of my case and had seen all the letters from my doctors. And he said that he completely understood my situation with IBD because he had IBS. And so, I mean, he clearly didn't understand at all, but I was assured that the other staff were informed of my needs, which included bathroom access. And then one day, a teacher repeatedly denied me access to the bathroom and lectured me in front of the class about the appropriate time to go to the bathroom. In the meantime, I was bleeding and really uncomfortable, and of course, feeling upset with the situation. While I did leave that situation, it had a lasting effect on me and affected my attitude towards seeking help. After years of continued inadequate support and multiple absences due to illness, I fell behind on schoolwork and was told that I wouldn't be able to do my HSC. No alternative pathways or support options were offered, so I essentially finished school halfway through year 12 when I couldn't attend classes or exams. I thought my lifelong dream of becoming a doctor was now impossible, so I started an apprenticeship after school. After a few years of working, I got sick again and spent a couple of months in and out of hospital. And when I finally came back to work, my boss said that my illness and recovery wasn't compatible with his business and that he wouldn't be able to continue giving me work. I was lost and I felt defeated by my disability. By that point, I had experienced years of being allowed to fall through the cracks by people who saw my disability as an inconvenience to them. Luckily, I still had drive and I decided that I didn't want to settle for options that didn't help me reach my goals. With a bit of help from friends, I was able to enroll in a university access program, which enabled me to get into a degree and with a lot of hard work into medical school. While I had all of these negative experiences after seeking help in the past, I still had hope that if I could get the right kind of support at uni, that I would be able to achieve my goals. Fortunately, the support I had and continue to receive from disability services in both my undergrad and now at UCID has been amazing. I was finally taken seriously, my disability was believed and understood, and I was able to complete an undergraduate degree in medicinal chemistry and have felt supported in my medical school journey over the last year. Having a disability action plan at university goes a long way to remove some of the discrimination that comes with having a disability, but the invisible aspect still leaves the door open to discrimination from others. There were times in my undergraduate degree where lecturers made comments like, your disability can't be that bad because you look fine, or you can't just use your disability to get out of doing work. At times like that, having disability services on my side was really valuable. So I would definitely encourage everyone with a disability to engage services like these. Since telling people about my disability, I found that most people believe that it has an impact on my life, but some people lack an understanding of how it may mean that I'm unable to do the same things as them, or they lack the empathy to recognize that certain arrangements are made to provide equity rather than to give me a competitive advantage over them. For example, I previously worked in a pathology lab and it was my first regular job in years because I couldn't work and study at the same time with my disability. One day I was talking about uni with a colleague who knew about my disability, and she kept bragging about how she worked all through uni and it meant that she could now buy a house. I tried to explain that I couldn't do that because of my disability, but she insisted that I was given handouts while she worked for everything she had. So while she knew and believed that I had a disability, she failed to recognize that it meant that I physically couldn't do the same things as her. So I think there's still a big gap between believing someone in terms of accepting what they suffer from and actually believing with a level of understanding and empathy behind that. If people did take invisible disabilities seriously and actively listen with the intention of understanding and gaining empathy, it would make things a lot easier for people like me. I wouldn't have to constantly fight for recognition and have the validity of my conditions and need for assistance questioned and critiqued. Another manifestation of people not taking disability seriously that I've come across is people forgetting that I have these conditions. And I don't expect everyone to remember, but it's important when they're people that really should remember, like managers or HR reps. At one workplace, they forgot I was immune compromised and said in a team meeting that we didn't need to implement certain additional COVID procedures because no one there was immune compromised, which made it a bit awkward when I had to remind everyone. So look, from all these experiences, I have gained a lot of resilience and learned to manage better, but my hope for the future is that certain barriers and the stigma of invisible disabilities can be removed. What I hope people take away from me sharing my story is that there are many things that everyone can and should actively be doing to create and maintain inclusive environments. We need to make people with disabilities feel safe to open up and seek support without the concern of having the information used to discriminate against them. One way we can do this is by demonstrating empathy and a genuine desire to learn. It is really important to always respect a person's boundaries and not feel entitled to information about their disability that they don't want to divulge. and to not share information without consent. The thing I most want people to understand is that people with disabilities, whether they're visible or not, are valuable and valid, and we have a wealth of experiences, knowledge, and skills that deserve to be celebrated and supported. Thank you for listening to my story.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Edward. And thank you for sharing your personal experience of living with your invisible disability, and in particular for sharing, some of the challenges which you have experienced and how you've navigated your way through this, which I'm really sure will help other students who may be experiencing similar experiences. So thank you. Another key reminder that I got from your talk was that, people's disabilities are unique, and each person will experience a certain disability in different ways. And often there are those misconceptions that, the same disability, same impacts, but it is a very unique experience for everyone. And also just another reminder from your talk, which is a timely reminder, is that, the adjustments and the support which students receive through inclusion and disability services are really designed to ensure that students are able to engage in their study on an equitable basis, as other students, rather than obtaining an unfair advantage. So that's a really good reminder.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I will now hand over to Katie for her talk. And Katie is a first-year Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Advanced Studies student. Thank you, Katie. Katie, you are on mute. If you could just unmute yourself. Yes.
Is that better?
Yes, that's better. Sorry, Katie, you're on mute again. Not quite sure why.
Something comes up on my screen saying that I've been muted.
Yeah.
Anyway, is that working?
Oh, yeah, that's working now.
So did you hear the first part, or did it cut out straight away?
No, I think if you could repeat yourself, that would be great.
Sweet. Sorry about that, guys.
Thank you.
So, as Dagmar introduced, I'm Katie. I'm 18 years old, and I moved from Newcastle this year to study and live on campus at USyd. On the weekends, I'm an avid hiker and wildlife photographer. When I'm not studying or relaxing out in nature, I work as a mental health speaker for Batir, a youth preventative mental health organisation. I'm quite a social person, and when people describe me, having a disability isn't necessarily something that comes up. I suppose this is mostly because it's not something that I tell people because of the stigma I know that a lot of people carry, and because the disability I have comes under what is termed an invisible disability. But to reintroduce myself here, hi, I'm Katie, and I have autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, or what used to be termed Asperger's syndrome. So autism is a lifelong and neurodevelopmental disability that's characterized by differences in behavioral and communicative progress. So it's not something that you can cure or grow out of. No one really knows what causes autism, but I can confirm the vaccines I've had have not made me more autistic. I was diagnosed at the age of 17 using the DSM-5, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which separates ASD into 3 main levels. Level 1 requiring support, level 2 requiring substantial support, and level 3 requiring very substantial support. And for a bit of context, Autism Spectrum Australia stated in 2018 that 1 in 70 people are on the autism spectrum in Australia. So autism isn't uncommon, it never has been. In order to break down misconceptions about autism, I want to take you through aspects of my personal story, but I want to emphasize that every person with autism is different. We all share similar attributes, of course, but the expression of these is always slightly unique. When I was 5, I was the perfect child at school. At home, it was a little bit different. The demands of being in a neurotypical run classroom were overwhelming, exhausting, and resulted in very consistent meltdowns at home. I was choosing my outfits from the age of 3, not because I was obsessed with fashion, but because I liked certain textures. This is also when the stimming started, which is when an autistic person does repetitive movements to regulate emotions. Stereotypically, this consists of flapping your hands around, foot tapping, jumping, or making repetitive noises, which ties into what's called echolalia. If I heard someone say a word that I liked, I would simply repeat it, and that would become my new stim. It's important to not stop an autistic person from stimming if it isn't inherently harmful to them. It's just their way of simply processing the world. Throughout the rest of primary school, I had very particular ways of doing things, and adapting to changing routines was always a challenge. As I entered high school, social cues came more into play. I think about things very literally and am an analyzer. Phrases like "you're the bee's knees" and "break a leg" were not something that sat very well with me. I envisioned an actual bee's knees rather than taking it as a compliment for I'm cool. By this point in my story, I'm 15, not diagnosed with autism yet, and simultaneously experiencing the effects of 5 mental illnesses. The diagnostic criteria for autism up until this point was heavily biased towards males and how it was typically expressed in them. It didn't take into account what's called masking or camouflaging, something particularly common in females with ASD. As we can see with 5-year-old me, depending on whether I'm at school or at home, my disability will either be invisible or visible. Masking is intentionally learning the neurotypical behaviours that society deems acceptable and then mimicking these when in public. So it's a survival strategy and something I definitely relied on as a kid to get through. I like to compare my experience of being autistic to driving a car. It feels like everyone around you is driving an automatic car and you're the only one who's been given the manual car, which of course requires more thinking power, and no one who drives past you can see that you're driving manual unless they look really closely. This was on an extreme level as a kid. Am I giving enough eye contact? Is my body stance right? Is my tone of voice right? Are my facial expressions too much or too little? When is it my turn to talk? And am I talking too much about my special interest? Why is everyone laughing at something that isn't funny? Masking requires a lot of effort, and I often need to recharge by myself afterwards when I've experienced a social situation. When I was 16, I read an article online and it explained everything. And after more research, I figured out myself that I was autistic. I brought it up with my parents at the dinner table the next night, and to my shock, I didn't have to argue with them to agree with me. I read the symptoms and they agreed straight away. Not that my parents were directly comparing me to my brother, but they had always noticed that I grew up a little differently. I hit the milestones of walking and speaking a little off skew and struggled in social situations. When I was 17, I was diagnosed. Seeking my diagnosis as a female was difficult to say the least. According to a 2015 report conducted by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, males are 4.1 times more likely than females to be diagnosed with ASD. Some females are even being diagnosed in their 50s. I went to one GP, told her my experience, and was immediately dismissed. I told another GP, and after some convincing, she agreed to send me to a specialist for testing. After 2 months of different appointments, I was diagnosed. I was so excited. It explained so much about who I was and would give me the support that I had always needed. I wasn't fully aware of the inherent stigma around autism until I told my psychologist at the time, who quickly notified me that it wasn't possible for females to have autism, especially females who had friends and had the capacity to look someone in the eye, which brings me to breaking down the stereotypes of autism. To do this, I'm going to explore the responses I've had after telling people I have autism for the first time. Number one, we have, I'm sorry. Well, yes, autism does provide me with unique challenges, but being autistic isn't some tragedy, and it's just part of who I am and how I perceive the world. It doesn't mean I can't have forms of success or happiness, but it might just make things a little bit trickier sometimes. The greats of our past have been thought to have autism, and leaders of the present have come forward to disclosing their diagnoses. From the past, we have my personal favourites, Charles Darwin, Sir Isaac Newton, Thomas Jefferson, and Steve Jobs. Today, Elon Musk and Greta Thunberg have disclosed their autism diagnoses. Number two, we have, everyone's a little bit autistic though, and I'm just going to say that this is wrong, but number three, and my personal favourite, oh, really? You don't look autistic. I would never have guessed. And when I say the word autism, there's definitely connotations attached. An image comes to mind, either of that one person you know on the autism spectrum, or a show or movie that you've watched featuring an autistic protagonist. Whatever image you have of someone with autism, get rid of it. I want to emphasize more than anything that disability doesn't have a look. You can't assume that someone isn't disabled because they don't look disabled. Number 4, we have, you seem to have a lot of friends and ability to connect with people though. How can you be autistic? And I think the media has kind of projected this stereotype, but yes, it is very much possible for someone with autism to form a strong, meaningful relationship with someone. Autistic people have emotional empathy, but they might show it in a bit differently to how neurotypicals expect them to, in either a way classed as too much emotion or too little. And number 5, we have you're a genius, really into trains, being autistic must be fun. And no, this is based on the idea that autistics have a special interest. Mine is climatic physics and wildlife conservation. I live and breathe all things to do with this, but not everyone on the spectrum has a special interest. And in terms of the genius part, yes, some autistics have a good memory, but this is definitely a stereotype and shouldn't immediately be a preconceived idea that you project onto everyone who tells you they have autism. So how can you contribute to an inclusive community for those with invisible disabilities, specifically those on the autism spectrum? So if someone tells you that they have a disability, believe them. Don't ask for evidence, proof, or invalidate their experience. Educate yourself, do some research on it, and create a safe and respectful place for the person to share their experiences if they feel comfortable. Ask questions rather than assuming how the person is affected. Ask if there are ways you can support them, and thank them for sharing with you. My friends and family became more educated and aware of my atypical attributes, which allowed me to thrive better and feel less stressed and embarrassed when out in public. From my experience, autism isn't always taken seriously. I've been in social situations where someone's done something silly and then someone said, "Oi, stop being so autistic." And considering 1 in 70 people have autism, I think this joke is not aging well. So let's cut things like this out of our language. And if you hear someone making a joke like this, call them out on it. It might be a little bit awkward, but it's important. Autism presents unique challenges at university. People with autism are 3 times less likely than neurotypicals to complete further education beyond school because of the inherent challenges it comes to when completing assignments and group projects and social situations. But I believe that with the right support and knowledge of what we have access to at UCID, we can reduce this statistic. For those listening to the event today with any form of disability, I encourage you to not feel ashamed or unworthy of asking for support from the UCID Inclusion and Disability faculty. For me, having an academic plan and support from my Disability Services Officer has made my first year of uni so much more manageable, supportive, and enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie, for sharing your personal experiences and challenges of living with autism from as young as a child through to when you were formally diagnosed at 17. And your talk really highlighted some of the things that we may not actually be aware, which is the stigma and the challenges associated with being diagnosed as a female with autism. So thank you for highlighting that. And also, just a reminder that we need to really break down the stereotypes of autism because every person with autism is different. And really, just once again, a reminder that if someone tells you they have a disability, such as autism, don't judge and don't assume how they're affected, and really don't question them in terms of, support that person. So thank you so much for sharing that, Katie. So now we are going to hear from Inclusion and Disability Services, Senior Inclusion and Disability Services Officer, Stephanie Palermo, who will be providing us with an overview of the support which Inclusion and Disability Services provides students with disability at the university. Thanks, Stephanie.
Hi everyone, thanks Dagmar. And firstly, I really want to say thank you to Stephanie, Katie and Ed for sharing your stories with us. This was such valuable information for us to hear, and I was watching the chat. I can see just how much your experiences have resonated with everybody here, so thank you. So as Dagmar mentioned, my name is Stephanie. I'm the Senior Disability Officer at Inclusion and Disability Services, and I'm here today to give you a brief overview of what we do, how students can engage with us, and what students can expect once registered with our service. So Inclusion and Disability Services is the main point of contact for students with disability at the university. Our role is to assess the needs of students with disability and determine the reasonable adjustments and supports that will assist to ensure equitable access to their academic content and their learning environments. Reasonable adjustments provide students with disability with the best opportunity to equitably participate and engage in their learning. And some of the available adjustments and supports that may be provided include things such as assessment adjustments, exam adjustments, lecture and in-class supports, library supports, access to assistive technology and alternate formatting, access to equipment and specific furniture when on campus, as well as our assistance connecting in with academic staff and other relevant services where needed. In addition, we also work closely with other key departments and faculty staff within the university to discuss and implement student supports and reasonable adjustments while ensuring that the academic integrity and core requirements are maintained, as well as to raise awareness and understanding of disability issues with all students and staff, and to support the staff who are supporting students with disability. Inclusion and Disability Services support students with a vast range of medical conditions and disabilities. As we've been discussing, the majority of these are invisible. So Stephanie, Ed and Katie have done a fantastic job of unpacking invisible disabilities, and an overview of some of the invisible conditions that we are currently supporting students with at the moment include specific and non-specific learning disorders in relation to reading, writing and math, various psychological conditions including anxiety disorders, depression and other mood disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, personality disorders and psychotic disorders. There are also the neurological conditions such as traumatic brain injury, epilepsy, migraines, autism and ADHD. Medical conditions, some of which include diabetes, cancer, heart conditions, Crohn's disease, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, and many other chronic illnesses and conditions. And there are also many students who may be hearing or vision impaired, but may not require visual aids such as hearing aids or glasses, which can be seen, and those who experience physical or chronic pain, but who don't necessarily require visible mobility aids. So the process to register with Inclusion and Disability Services is quite straightforward, and students can find the steps and information of how to do this on our website. So firstly, students will log into our system and create a pending profile. They'll then download our supporting documentation form to be completed by their treating specialist or medical practitioner. And from there, they'll reach out to us to book in their first registration appointment with a disability officer. This initial appointment takes approximately 1 hour, depending on how much needs to be unpacked. And disability officers use this time to really consult with the student and gather information on their lived experience and individual support requirements. And then along with the medical documentation recommendations provided by their doctors, determine the reasonable adjustments that are to be made available to the student. This appointment is also an opportunity for students to ask and have answered any questions that they may have, and also to identify any pressing concerns that may need to be addressed right away. During this initial appointment, or perhaps in a second follow-up appointment if needed, students also receive an overview of our online system, and referrals to other support services may also be discussed. So we do also acknowledge that some students may be unsure whether Inclusion and Disability Services is the right service for them, or they may be hesitant to register. And so we also offer prospective appointments. So these provide students with the opportunity to have a conversation directly with the disability officer, to find out more about the service in detail, and to ask any questions that they may have before deciding whether they actually want to go ahead and register. Once a student is registered, they are then able to access their adjustments, submit online requests if needed, and including the request for an academic plan to be put together and sent out to the faculty each semester. So Ed and Katie did make mention to academic plans in their talks, and this is the document that communicates the students' adjustments and support to the relevant staff who are responsible for implementing these adjustments. It's important to note that a student's diagnosis will not be disclosed on their academic plan. However, the impacts of their disability on their studies in relation to their supports is outlined. So once registered, there are several ways students can engage with disability services officers. They can book one-on-one appointments via Zoom or phone, and eventually face-to-face. They can submit queries through their disability services profile page, and they can reach out via email. We are a student-driven service, and this means that our students are in control of how frequently they engage with us. So for many students, once they're registered and their adjustments are in place, they may find that they are managing quite well, and they may not need to reach out to us regularly throughout the semester, only getting in touch if they need our assistance for something or if their file needs review. However, depending on the impacts of the condition or the complexity of their supports, some of our students do require regular ongoing contact with a disability officer throughout the semester, which is not a problem. This could be weekly or fortnightly, or in the lead up to assessments and exams taking place. And this aspect of our service is individual and determined based on each student's specific support needs. So in a nutshell, we are here to work with our students and alongside university and faculty staff to ensure our students have the best possible opportunity to succeed throughout their studies. So this was quite a brief overview, but I hope that it's given some insight on who we are and what we do. However, we are always here to help. So if you have any questions that you would like to discuss with us directly, you're welcome to get in touch anytime.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Stephanie, for that overview. And as Stephanie mentioned, just a reminder for any students who may be attending today's panel, if you're unsure as to whether inclusion and disability services can assist you. If you do have a disability that is currently impacting on your study, we are available for prospective appointments. So please feel free to reach out to us via our contact number or email, which we will post in the chat very shortly. Okay, well, that was a very quick hour. We do have approximately 4 minutes left for questions. So that's what we will move to now. Please submit any questions that you have for the panel via Slido, and I will have a look as to whether any questions are coming through now. Okay, so I do have a question here. I feel some people judge too much on my hearing disability. How to stop their judgment that may impact on my study and career? Any members of the panel would like to answer that question? Katie?
I think it's all about kind of finding the right people that respect your disability and are able to educate themselves to a point where you can both kind of form a friendship or work relationship in harmony. And if people aren't respecting it, we don't have energy for that. We don't have time for that. Definitely just seeking support from people who you can trust and who you know can support you.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Katie. Second question. I never thought my chronic health condition was a disability, but now that I recognize that, I feel guilty about the support I receive. How can I overcome this? Edward?
I can answer that.
Thanks.
I think it's something that I still struggle with myself. And I think it's just recognizing that if you do need help, there are people out there that are willing to provide that support to you. And it's always better to get help when you need it. You can go out and find whether or not people are able to help you and then still never use that help. But it's better to have that option in your back pocket rather than to never ask for help and then reflectively look back and go, oh, I could have really used some help.
If we have time for me to add on to that as well.
Absolutely.
That is something that we very oftenly hear when we meet with students, particularly if they're in the initial stages of registering with us. And I think it's people who are living with an ongoing medical condition or disability are extremely skilled at adapting and coping and having it feel normal that when things actually may be a lot more difficult than they are for other people. So I think that it could just be about educating yourself on the supports that are out there, getting information, just learning about what is available to you, and also recognizing that these supports are there specifically to support people with medical conditions and disabilities. So they are not there in any way to provide an advantage, simply to even the playing field and give you the same opportunities that other people have who may not be dealing with a medical condition. But if you aren't registered with us and you would like to talk that through with a disability officer, you're very welcome to reach out and book an appointment.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We have now run out of time. So I hope everyone enjoyed today's panel event. I know that I thought it was fantastic. And once again, I'd really like to thank our panel for sharing their experiences, incredibly valuable. Stephanie Mantilla, Edward Cairns and Katie Barton, thank you so much. And please join us for the remaining Disability Inclusion Week events. And we will be posting just an overview of some of the other week's events in the chat. So thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic day.